great country.
Blue jacket. Whoa. Hard to say. Yes, hard to say.
Thanks, Carlo. The idea was to play some games to remember words when you were singing. I don't want to say that these lessons was very good. We obviously want to great.
Nick, you love it?
Yes, we will do this.
Eat paper, chop penguins, and we have to like the
My first day teaching in a Korean classroom. This video is very anticlimactic. My first day teaching, it wasn't anything crazy, it wasn't anything too exciting, but one of my viewers wanted to hear about my first day teaching in Korea. So I get up at 7 or 8 in the morning. The good thing is that I don't have to start teaching until 4 p.m. My school opens at 4 o'clock. My first class is at 4:05. So I get there real early, around 3:30. I have some things in my mind about what I want to do my first day. But to tell you the truth, I'm kind of nervous because I've never been the teacher in a classroom before. I've been a student, obviously, for the first 21 years of my life. And I wasn't really a great student. I was like a B student who really didn't try that hard. I was kind of a slacker, to be honest. I was the one in class quietly joking with my friends and making fun of the teacher. So now I'm that guy that kids are joking about and making fun of. What a role reversal. I'm sitting at my new desk, and I have 2 desks next to me because the other teacher is not there. The school usually has 2 English teachers, but now they're only hiring just me because they don't have enough students. So I have 2 big desks next to me. And I have all the workbooks and textbooks in front of me. I'm trying to understand the schedule. The kids come in and they have usually 2 classes of 40 minutes. They have a language class for 40 minutes with one of the teachers, one of 4 teachers, including myself. And then they sit in a listening lab and they listen to dictation. I've never sat in on their listening lab, I'm not sure, but they have 1 class or 1 or 2 classes and a listening lab. The first thing is I'm delighted to see that my classes are not very big. Some of my classes have 3, 4, 5 students. My biggest class was 10 or 11 students. But it was still not easy for my first time. So because I was new, I didn't want to bury the kids' noses in textbooks right away. I wanted to spend the first day just talking and getting to know these kids and their ability. So I spent the first day basically just talking about me and answering kids' questions. What I said was, I'm your new teacher. I would like to learn about you, and I would like you to learn about me. So ask me as many questions as you want, such as, where are you from? And it wasn't bad. I talked about where I'm from. I talked about my family. It was easily enough to fill 40 minutes for each class. What was hard was learning the students' names. Most Koreans have 3 names. If you're familiar with American baseball, maybe you know Chan-Ho Park or Shin Soo-Choo. All their names are 3 names, 3 syllables like that. But in my school, they give them English names because they're learning English. They have English names. And that's kind of fun when you get to give them a name. You let them pick their name. So I can just pluck a name of one of my friends out of the air and just say, well, your new name now is Mike, for instance. And they love it. It actually took me about 5 weeks to memorize everybody's names. That's how long it takes me. It takes me a while to remember names. Luckily, these kids were not flying off the walls going crazy on my first day, or my first week at least. The smaller classes were easy to manage. You only have 3, 4, 5 students. You can talk to them, and if they get out of hand, you can just kind of give them a look and they're quiet. But my 1 or 2 classes where there were 9, 10, or 11 students, you think that they would be very respectful, but these are middle school kids, so you have to understand, they're in school at 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night after being in school all day. So I totally understand that they're a little bit tired and they don't want to work real hard mentally, and it's hard for them not to talk to their friends who are sitting right next to them. But they were talking to their friends, and it was very hard keeping their attention. And I learned very early you have to put something in their hands, an activity, a puzzle, a game. You have to put them in teams. It's very hard, but you have to keep them busy, and you can't talk to them very specifically in English because their English isn't that great. They only have basic English. They know words, but they can't put a sentence together perfectly. They know quiet. They'll know what quiet means, but if you say pay attention, they might not know what that means. So there was a little challenge there in keeping them in line, because their Korean teachers, of course, can yell at them and specifically tell them to shut up and sit down and pay attention, and they'll know what that means. But discipline, it wasn't that hard, it wasn't that big a deal. Looking back on it now, it's been 6 weeks. I have had to do some discipline things with almost every big class. You know, when a kid acts up, I have them just go outside and sit down outside in the hallway. Of the 3 or 4 times I've asked students to do that, they all just said no. I said, go outside and sit down. And they said no. I said, really? So I went and got one of the other teachers, and the Korean teacher went in there and yelled at them. Hey, it has to happen. The kids have to know that they have to sit down and be quiet. And just because I don't speak Korean doesn't mean that I'm not as important as everybody else. And that was it. When the day was done, it was about 9:30. I was wiped out. By the end of the day, my throat was so hoarse from trying to talk loud to telling the kids to quiet down. I realized that I was talking too much, or talking too loudly, or just wearing myself out, exerting too much energy. Something you learn when you're a beginner. What was nice was we get gimbap every night. My boss buys dinner, which is gimbap, which is like a long Korean sushi roll. Dinner was nice. And when I got home, it was around 10:30. I was so tired, I was wiped out, I just crashed in my bed. And day number 2 was pretty much the same. So that was my first day teaching in a Korean class.
Module 7, Learning Strategies. The goal of teaching strategies is to create autonomous learners. Learners who can learn by themselves, inside and outside the classroom. Research and classroom practices are evolving in many directions to try to better understand and facilitate learning for students of all ages. In general, successful language learners tend to select strategies that work well together according to the requirements of the language task. These learners can easily explain the strategies they use and why they use them. Module Focus, Introduction. In this module, we will focus on some key features of 2 classes of learning strategies: language learning and communication strategies, and cognitive and metacognitive strategies. If we accept that cognition is knowing or learning, then we can say that metacognition is developing an awareness of and an ability to monitor that learning process. We will see that there is, in fact, a lot of overlap between all of these strategies. Teachers can help students develop effective strategies by identifying students' current learning strategies through surveys, interviews, or other means, helping individual students understand which strategies work best for them, and assisting students in developing a set of strategies that work well together rather than using a scattered approach. Number 1, viewing points: language learning and communication strategies. Some characteristics of successful, self-directed language learners are that they have a strong drive or motivation to communicate. They are willing to take risks and make mistakes. They recognize language and communication patterns. They use guessing and prediction strategies. They pay attention to meaning. They monitor and self-correct their own speech. They practice with the language at every opportunity, and over time they learn to think and perhaps even dream in the target language, English. Video segment number 1. Watch, analyze, infer. First, review the list of strategies in the manual. Use it as a guide while you listen to this teacher describe some of the underlying organizational principles of her classroom and the kinds of learning strategies she supports. What kind of learning strategies do you think are built into this class? And how are they evidenced in the things that she describes and that you see?
Okay, they have many challenges, like any group of people who live their, base country. And some of these kids are from war-torn countries. So these kids cook, keep the house. Some of them work part-time or many hours in order to help supplement the income of the family. So they have that challenge too, Then academically, the challenges they face academically are several. Their language in their country is their native language first, and then English is the second language. And when we say that English is the second language, the English is spoken officially, in offices, okay? So they are used to speaking the pidgin English. And their problems are kind of peculiar to them. Writing is another problem they have, because they first of all think in their language, and then they try to translate it to English, and then sometimes along the line they lose part of the meaning, or sometimes they find themselves repetitious, because back home people use lots of proverbs and people repeat themselves for emphasis. And when they do much of that in English, they say, okay, you keep repeating what you've said before, you're saying again, and they keep wondering. And again, some of their spelling too. So that's basically, the problem. Writing, they have lots of problem in that. Speaking too, not as much as writing, because at least they have some knowledge of, spoken English from their country. Yeah, what goes through my mind is that these kids have gone through interrupted schooling, because many are from Sierra Leone and Liberia. So many, that gap, they've lost out a lot. So when I'm teaching, I draw from, lots of sources in order to, to help them. And most of the time, I start off from what they know already. Okay, like this folk tale we are reading. And you see, I try to tell them a folk tale, just to jog their memory. They've heard, if not this story, probably similar stories from their home base. So, and folk tale is literature. So we start off from the known, then I now move over to the unknown, so they can transfer that. So I try to do that, with the students. So let's go to the next thing, which is small group pre-listening discussion. And as you can see, if you look up there, you will see that I put down the different topics you need to discuss in your group. Within 2 minutes, see whether you can list a few items. Group 1, which is Ashton and Abby, you want to copy it down, what your question is. Times you were tricked or betrayed, how you felt. The three of you, you need to talk, discuss it, and come up with a few points, okay? We go to group 3, Edward and Elizabeth Giassi. What you know about crocodiles. Yeah, what you know about crocodiles. Okay, we should wind up now so we can discuss, so we can share. We share it before we continue.
Our question was, time you was tricked or betrayed, how you felt.
Okay.
I think like when someone got betrayed or tricked, it will feel sad because you put your trust, and then you because you believe in the person and then you get disappointed. I think that one is not nice.
We now go to the next group. Group 3, Edward and Elizabeth. You want to read out your question?
Okay, you say what you know about crocodile, and we wrote like they live in the water and swamp.
They are ugly animals.
They have.
They are what?
They are ugly animals.
Ugly animals. Ugly animals. Okay.
They have many long tail. Long teeth.
Long, yeah. Wow. Yeah. Sure. And sharp too.
They also have a rough body.
A rough body?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're very right. Very good. How many? You're not done, sure.
They have big tails at the end of their back.
Oh, okay. That's very good. How many of you have seen crocodiles before? Either in pictures or... Oh, many of you. They eat human... Oh, you're right. Because they are carnivores, right? They are carnivores. Okay. That's right. They eat meat. Okay? They eat meat. Okay, very good. Let's clap for them too. They did a good job. Yes. Sure.
Like sometimes some people say in like crocodile tears or something.
Oh, crocodile tears.
Yeah.
Okay, you know.
It's just like outsmart when somebody outsmarts you, like
Uh-huh.
they said when you do crocodile tears.
I do understand what you're trying to say. Have people ever heard of crocodile tears? Someone said
Something bad and they ask you, you try to cry.
You try to pretending like
you're pretending like
you're crying.
You're crying, but you're not crying. You're just
yeah. Stop crying. Shedding crocodile tears. Today, the title of the story we are going to read is How Chameleon Became a Teacher. And both the crocodile and chameleon, they belong to a class of animals called reptiles. Thank you so much. Reptiles, okay? Why am I explaining some of these things? Is to support the biology class you are taking. So let's get to the story. Are you ready?
Yeah.
And the lesson again, I draw on things like biology, which is a problem which is a subject that many students have problem. This is an English class, but you could see that I tried to incorporate biology in what I was teaching. That was why I talked about mammal, the characters in the story were reptiles. I indirectly talked about the characteristics of a reptile, how they differ from mammals. So that's an aspect of biology that I'm purposely, injecting into what I'm teaching in order to, I pursue it from all angles, and I try as much as possible to, to teach them the various skills in English, the oral, you see the morning message, I put up the oral, the listening, then the speaking and the writing. Like what we did today, I try to incorporate all of these things, into that. Since they are ESOL students, students teaching English to students of other languages, we use lots of pictures. So pictorials and things like that help. And I used the movie because that one was very effective too, because one, students love movies, two, it's pertinent to what they are learning, and they saw the crocodile in action, so at least it will set their imagination going. That time I was teaching what type of a friendship could a tiny little animal like a chameleon and a crocodile have. I mean, what type of a friendship? So it will set them thinking. I didn't want to give out all the answers because I gave them worksheets. I wanted them to think at home to be able to make some of these connections. But I used some of these, the overhead and the audio, the movie. I used them to, to boost up, as an addition, to help explain to them, so they can see these things in visual forms, and hear them. It will be more meaningful to them, Before the class is over, I try to make students, each and every one of them, talk or answer questions. I try to encourage that because if not, we can easily lose some students. Who knows, when I'm done teaching here, I want some of them to be in my place, pick up that marker, and be teaching. So it
Summary.
will boost up their confidence. And
This teacher works with young adults. She incorporates many learning and metacognitive strategies in her teaching. Clearly, she understands her students' current strengths, needs, and challenges. Some of the strategies that she supports in the classroom include those for language-specific skills, for example, speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Those for cognition and metacognition, for example, schema activation, transfer of knowledge, reflection, and so on. And those that involve affective factors such as motivation, confidence, and a trusting atmosphere to encourage risk-taking and participation. Module focus. Summary. The focus in Module 7 has been on language learning and communication strategies and cognitive and metacognitive strategies. With strategy training, teachers should help students develop affective and social strategies, as well as language-related strategies based on their individual learning styles, current strategy use, and specific goals. See the manual for readings and more information on this and other topics related to learning.
I'm Caitlin Morgan, Assistant Director of English Language Studies here at the New School for General Studies. And on behalf of Oxford University Press, our co-sponsors and co-creators and co-designers of this event, and the New School, we welcome you warmly to this very exciting event tonight, 7 Ways of Looking at Grammar with our very own esteemed Scott Thornbury. This is really exciting to see such a turnout. A little overwhelming, but very affirming that we're on to something really good. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. What you may not know is that tonight's talk celebrates the launch of an ongoing series of ELT professional development workshops, which are designed to help you stay connected to each other and the ongoings in the field. It was so nice to see so many certificate graduates, teachers seeing each other who haven't seen each other in a long time, people who used to work together at other schools who are re-meeting again. This is what we very much wanted these events and this series to be about as well. The fact is that despite our strong desire and need to commune with our colleagues, to continue to develop and grow, we live very busy lives. We're too busy and or too broke to take advantage of the professional development opportunities that are out there, like conferences and courses and trainings. So we wanted to make it a little easier for you. And we want this Oxford New School ELT Professional Development Series to provide a much needed meeting place and learning space that's easily accessible, free, festive, and of the highest quality content. We want these once a semester gatherings to give you an opportunity to connect with colleagues, with current thinking and ideas from noted experts in the field like Scott, and to connect you with the current literature and the teaching materials on the market. I hope you walk away from tonight's event feeling appreciated, more connected, current, and energized in the important work that you do. Thank you for coming, and please join us again and again. And now, to present our feature speaker tonight, I'm pleased to introduce Sean Connelly, the chair of the English Language Studies Department here at the New School for General Studies.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you for the enormous amount of work you put into making this possible. This is a great turnout. I can't believe turning people away at the door. It speaks to the reality that Scott is a rock star. And that makes being the person introducing him really uncomfortable because, how do you introduce someone who needs no introduction? I thought about this a little bit, and here's what I discovered about Scott. In addition to the title of this presentation, 5 of Scott's 13 books on English language teaching include the word grammar in their titles. This might suggest that he is the sort of academic who really can only see one very narrow topic. And yet, Scott holds a very deep concern for the teachers around the world who suffer from OGS. Obsessive Grammar Syndrome. So while Scott possesses the academic depth to really plumb one particular topic, his interests are broad and methodology is one of many. And it's that combination of depth and breadth of his concern for what makes sense and is useful to the classroom teacher on the ground, as well as the depth of the theory that informs those activities, that brought him to the New School as one of the founding faculty members of our MA and TESOL program. And we're very thankful and fortunate to have that be true. Scott is in demand as a plenary speaker around the globe, and in fact, I keep running into him pretty much anywhere I go, which is delightful. And I wanted to get a sense of this breadth. What are all the things that he talks about? So I Googled him. And I found some very interesting things. But my favorite, the one topic that he has not spoken about, as far as I could tell, is ESP, English for Specific Purposes. However, at IATEFL, in the year 2008, and which I can assure you is currently available in video form on the IATEFL site, is Scott's Eating for Specific Purposes. I didn't even know this was a subject area. This is great. So I'm very pleased to join Oxford University Press to introduce someone who is a I can't even say it, prolific author. He is an expert who has a sense of humor. He's a teacher's teacher, and someone that I feel very honored to call a colleague, Scott Thornbury.
Thank you. Thank you for those over-generous words, and thank you. I mean, I'm bowled away by the turnout. It speaks. It was exciting. To me, it's slightly sad that there's nothing better in New York to be doing on Thursday evening. Talking about grammar. I mean, how sad is that? But I'm delighted to see you. I'm really, do you know this word, chuffed? I'm really super excited and gratified to see so many people here and so many of my students on the MAT, so many of whom, or some of whom I've met for the first time face to face this very evening. So this is the wonderful thing about this kind of global community that you create with online learning. I mean, the wonderful thing that it carries on morphing into from photos on a discussion board to real people in a real place and a real occasion. So that's terrific. And I'm sorry for those of you who have just completed the 4 weeks with me on that face-to-face MAT that are still here tonight. I can't believe it that you haven't had enough of me. But it's only one more hour of me and then you're done. I want to thank my sponsors, Oxford University Press, very much for making this possible, and for the book display. Now I invite you, when we finish in about 55 minutes time, to have a look. I am to thank the New School, of course, for making this possible and for making it possible for me to kind of launch myself in this side of the Atlantic. I mean, it's very exciting for me to have been working relatively recently in this context. So I'm really delighted, as I say, chuffed. I have to apologise though for the New School. If those of you who received a notification about this talk on Twitter, did anybody notice the deliberate spelling mistake in the title? No? Oh, well, good. I shouldn't mention it then, but no, it was called 7 Ways of Looking at Grammar, but grammar was spelled with an E. Tut, tut. But whoever wrote that, they're in good company, because in fact, I wrote a book for Oxford University Press which was published about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's called Grammar. As Sean says, it's one of the 5 books I've written with the word grammar in the title, and it's just grammar. And it was lucky enough to win an award in Britain, the English Speakers Union Award, as a runner-up. This is a very prestigious award. It was presented at Buckingham Palace by none other than His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh. And I wasn't able to go. I was teaching in Vermont at the time. But my publishers went along, my publishers from Oxford, and they received the certificate saying it was the runner-up award, that book, from His Royal Highness himself, the Duke of Edinburgh. When they unrolled this book, beautifully handwritten in kind of Gothic script, grammar was spelled with an E. And the Duke hadn't even noticed. So what does that say about the Queen's English? But unfortunately, my publishers then sort of had it redone, so it was respun. I thought, oh no, I would love to have gone around holding that up. You know, it's signed by His Royal Highness Philip. Anyway, that just... Well, the other thing I want to say is kind of a caution. Although the talk is about grammar, it's not about prescriptive grammar. I mean, those of you thinking of coming along expecting to hear somebody sounding off about who versus whom, or infinitives or prepositions at the end of sentences, it's not about that. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm assuming that we're all in the same game together, that we're all interested in language and the teaching of English as a second language, and therefore we're interested in languages for communication, and particularly English, and that we're not interested in English as a kind of marker of social respectability. So I'm not going that route. I'll take questions about it at the end if you're interested, but I'm bearing in mind we are, in a sense, I'm not a language maven, I'm an applied linguist, and so that's what my interest is. And so I just wanted to tell you that right from the start. When I say applied linguist, I say linguist itself is an ambiguous term. It means I'm a studier of language, not a speaker of many languages. It's always a problem when I come into JFK, in fact, and they ask me, what am I doing here? And I say, well, I'm working for the New School University, I'm teaching on a master's program. I say, what's your field? And I say, well, I'm a linguist. And they say, oh, how many languages do you speak? Well, you know, what shall I I'm always wrong-footed, because if I say, well, I speak one really well, I think, well, you're not a linguist. But if I say I speak 10, they might start asking me questions about Urdu or something, and so I have to kind of like dissemble. But I'm not that kind of linguist. In fact, David Christian in his book recently told a very similar story. It's obviously a problem of the term. So what I want to look at today is grammar. And I want to look at it through various lenses, 7 to be specific, and one of them not being the prescriptive grammar, who-whom kind of lens. And I'm taking as my text a poem which no doubt will be familiar to many of you. It was certainly a poem that I've always been very fond of by Wallace Stevens. And it's called 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. Do you know it? It's a lovely thing. It's a very sort of, what's the word? It's kind of imagistic. It's very short stanzas where a blackbird is viewed from 13 different perspectives, and it obviously is influenced heavily by the haiku kind of form. So this is one stanza from the poem. The river is moving, the blackbird must be flying. But I've always kind of liked the title. I thought I could do something with this. I'm not going to do 13 ways of looking at grammar, simply because, not because there aren't 13 ways of looking at grammar, because we don't have time. In fact, we'd be lucky if we get through 7, but I'll try. There are 13 theories of grammar, and there are many more. It's interesting, in fact, that there are so many theories of grammar. You would think, well, why are there so many theories? Is there a shortage of data? But there isn't. There's no shortage of data, especially now with corpus linguistics, as we have more data than we can handle. And yet there are a proliferation of theories of grammar. It seems like every linguist who feels he's sort of worth his salt has to sort of brand a new theory of grammar. I'm going to look at a few of them. None of them are mine. I don't have a theory of grammar. I just kind of, like a magpie, blackbird, I pick and choose. And we'll come back to that point in a minute. But it is interesting. I think it is important as teachers and educators to think about our own theories of grammar, because they do, in a sense, have a knock-on effect. They affect the way we teach, how we construe grammar, how we construe language. It's going to percolate into the way that we actually teach language. And this is a point that's been made many times. This is a quotation way back 1965 from William Mackey. Said, language teaching methods and the teaching of them depend ultimately on what the teacher or the method maker thinks a language is. And that's what I want to look at. So I'm going to look at grammar then, grammar specifically, because it's such an important part of language, from 7 different perspectives. Grammar's rules, grammar's structures, grammar's mathematics, algorithms, texture, collocation, and it's an emergent phenomenon. It gets heavier as you go down the list, but bear with me. So let's start with grammar's rules. And I think as those of you who are language teachers, whether it's of English or any other language, will probably be familiar with a way of describing grammar in terms of descriptive rules. And there's whole books out there for students, for teachers. I've contributed to them myself. And grammar rules go much like this. It's particularly pedagogical rules. Let's take, for example, the sentence, the blackbird must be flying. If we extract the syntax of the grammatical nucleus, and there we've got a structure like must be ing. And this is how this might be described in any descriptive grammar. We use must plus ing to say that something that is in progress at or around the time of speaking is logically necessary and supposed to be saying the blackbird must be flying. That's a good descriptive rule, and it's really useful. it's useful for us as teachers, us as teacher trainers, us as educators. Question, of course, is it useful to the learner of English as a second language? And there's an assumption out there that it kind of is. But learners come up against these rules and they kind of knock sideways. Why? Well, because of the meta-language, terms like logically necessary, etc., in progress, and even the concepts, the way of thinking about language, even for adults who may have studied other languages, find some of these concepts rather elusive, to say the least. So as I said, they're useful for us as teachers. They may not be so useful for the learner. And there's a good case of that. A learner of Brazilian Portuguese, who himself was a linguist, Dick Schmidt from the University of Hawaii, studying Portuguese in Brazil, kept a diary of his language learning experiences while he was studying at a reputable language school in Rio, studying Portuguese. And I think this is rather salutary to read this. He said he describes in his diary one lesson at this language centre. The class started off with a discussion of the imperfect versus perfect. Those of you who are Brazilian Portuguese speakers will know what he's talking about here. With the teacher eliciting rules from the class, she ended up with more than a dozen rules on the board, which I'm never going to remember when I need them. I'm just going to think of it as background and foreground and hope that I get a feel for the rest of it. And I think this is particularly interesting because this is not some lay person. This is not somebody who doesn't know it. This is the Associate Professor of Applied Linguistics at the University of Hawaii. And he can't get his head around these rules. So what chance have our students got? Now, I'm not saying that the rule, he couldn't get his head around them, but he knew that he couldn't apply it. In real time, it would be very difficult to access these 13 different rules and kind of riffle through them and apply them. And I say this at my peril because, I mean, a lot of teaching of English as a second or foreign language is predicated on students learning these rules or being exposed to them. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but I'm saying don't hold out too much hope that the learners will be able to apply them automatically. And I think, in a sense, we know this as teachers, experienced teachers. We've come up against this constantly. We say, but I taught you this last week. You think, I'm only human. You know, I cannot remember, carry around 13 rules about the perfect, the imperfect. Think how many rules there are about articles in English, for example. So I think it's interesting that however accurate a descriptive grammar is, it doesn't have a psychological reality necessary for the learner. And I saw this once myself watching a class of learners, watching a teacher teaching a class in Spain who was teaching the difference between will and going to, both two future forms. Yeah? And making the distinction, the accurate distinction, according to descriptive grammars, between will for spontaneous decisions, like there's the door, I'll answer it, or there's the phone, I'll get it, kind of thing around, and going to for premeditated decisions, as in, what are you going to do next summer? I'm going to Hawaii. And he made the distinction very nicely. And then one student, slightly elderly student, put her hand up and said, excuse me, none of my decisions are spontaneous. It was particularly galling. The teacher was being watched at the time, but it was actually, it's true. For that student, that rule didn't have psychological reality. So what's the point of it? So we need to, again, to be handing out these rules with kind of health warning attached. Well, I mean, people realized this a long time ago. There was this kind of reaction way back in the end of the 19th century against a rule-driven approach to teaching languages, what was used to be called grammar translation, or rules and translation. Of course, what supplanted that was a different view of grammar, which came into force, particularly in the States, in the mid-20th century, and is represented by the structuralist view of grammar as structures. And particularly, for example, I never know how to pronounce his name, I'm sure it's not Fries, but Fries, I presume. Does anybody know? Fries, Charles Fries, who was one of the first, not only to write a structural grammar of English, but to base it on corpus data, which was amazing in 1952 when there weren't computers. So it was all handwritten corpus data taken off telephone conversations. But he wanted to write a grammar of English which was simply structural. There was just the structures. It was kind of like, these are all the different permutations of sentence possibilities, of slots and fillers, as it were, in English. The grammar of a language consists of all the devices that signal structural meanings. That is the grammar, the devices that signal structural meanings. All the structural signals are strictly formal matters that can be described in physical terms. So this is like real structuralism. Formal Not interested in the meaning, not interested in the function, simply the forms. What are all the different forms that are possible in English of sentences? And of course, this was an idea, a view of grammar that nicely mapped onto a view of learning, which was current at the time, that by practicing forms and simply becoming habituated with the forms, you could learn a language. And we now know that as audiolingualism. And it was represented by, this is one way of displaying these kind of structures in terms of the wonderful substitution table, where you can see which slots, which can be filled with what kind of words. And of course this became very much a feature of the audiolingual approach, pattern practice drills, etc. Like this, or I thought, oh, well, that was the theory behind it. And this is Fries again and Lado, who was again one of the architects of audiolingualism. To learn a new language, one must establish already the patterns of the language's subconscious habits. We've got a theory of learning mapping onto very neatly a description of language in terms of its forms. And you get books like this I found at a second-hand bookshop in Barcelona, where I love the graphics, don't you love it? You know, have we improved on that really? I love the text too. I have a round head. I mean, that's a useful expression. Next time you're configuring your Facebook description, you know, my body is slim. These are my feet. But I mean, we can laugh, we will laugh, because we have come some way towards grounding language in a much more authentic context. But nevertheless, this was one way of displaying the kinds of patterns that students needed to engage with at a low level. And of course, the way they practice patterns, probably can't see this, but these kind of oral drills, which are, again, fairly decontextualized and mindless. For example, person A says, didn't you have a house in the country? Yes. You did. You had a beautiful house. It's English for amnesiacs, you know. Or no, you didn't. But it didn't matter, because the point was to practice the grammar, to practice the structures, to get those embedded, get them habituated. So of course, a lot of mileage was made out of the fact that the structural approach didn't in fact necessarily, this is another graphic from the same book. I think it kind of sums it up. I don't know what it was doing there, but the notion of parroting was, of course, is what, I mean, it wasn't like that. Those of you who taught like I did when I first started my career teaching in language laboratories, there was a certain comfort in hearing the students working away, practicing these structures, and getting them right, at least getting them fluent. That was the irony, in fact. We thought we were working on accuracy. In fact, what we were really working on was fluidity. The students were learning these, probably learning patterns as whole chunks. We'll come to that in a minute. But of course, what kind of knocked all that sideways was the advent of this man. I showed this slide, incidentally, in Italy recently, and I said, who's that? And they said, it's Woody Allen. That great linguist from MIT. There's Noam Chomsky, for those of you who haven't seen it. I mean, it's not a current photo, but of course, it's famously known that Chomsky came along and kind of with a kind of below the belt body blow, knocked all the theoretical structure behind behaviorism sideways with his famous critique of Skinner's verbal behavior. And he proposed, of course, that language is not a set of habits, it's something that we're innately hardwired with, and we come born with a kind of language acquisition device or whatever it's subsequently been called. And he said, but what's interesting about Chomsky, everybody say, oh, the Chomskyan revolution, big change. But in fact, you know what? It wasn't really that big a change. It was still about structure, but it just went underground. You know? Instead of surface structure, the obsession was deep structure. And what Chomsky was interested in is trying to describe the deep structure of not just English, but all languages, the universal properties of language which we are supposedly born with. And that's what he was getting at, and describe it in terms which are completely and totally 100% formal. Again, so it's a formalism, structuralism, just, as I say, gone sort of underground. So this is a statement, I think, which captures quite well the fact that what he was trying to do is describe the logic, or the mathematics, if you like, of language. He says, it is reasonable, this is at his way back, 57, and I don't think he's moved away from this position. It is reasonable to regard the grammar of language L, any language, ideally as a mechanism that provides an enumeration of the sentences of L in something like the way in which a deductive theory gives an enumeration of a set of theorems. And I put that rather dense quote up simply to the collocation between language and theorems, I think, is significant, because this is what he was trying to do, essentially, to reduce language to a set of generative theorems, the formulae that would generate all the well-formed sentences of a language. And so, of course, famously, these are represented in these tree diagrams of this type. So there's our sentence again, displayed in kind of Chomskyan transformative generative terms. Now, I will stand to be corrected there. I tried to do that myself, consulting the books, and I probably left something out. But those of you who have done an MA or whatever, a degree in linguistics or applied linguistics in the States will probably have engaged with this kind of stuff. In fact, you can't open a book on linguistics in the States without finding a lot of tree diagrams. And it's interesting because you won't find them when you go across the pond. You won't find tree diagrams in Europe. They are very much, in fact, they kind of radiate out. You can see the density of tree diagrams. There's a sort of, the epicenter is in Boston or Cambridge. And they kind of radiate out. No, Elke? I have to be careful here. I'm perilous ground. I mean, I can be, but I would say that our MA TESOL here in the New School, we do not do much on tree diagrams, and there's very good reasons. And the reasons why, as elegant as these are, they are, again, not psychologically applicable. I mean, no student is going to be able to look at that and generate necessarily a sentence automatically using that kind of structure. Now, and Chomsky, to his credit, would say exactly the same. He's not a psychologist, he's not even a psycholinguist, he's a linguist, he's a mathematician, he's a political theorist. I mean, he's not interested in the psychological mechanisms which generate sentences like that. And he says, I don't know how it happens, I don't know how it's proceduralized, this innate grammar. I'm only interested in the fact that there is an innate grammar. So that's one thing. Bless him, Chomsky does not make any claims. In fact, he advises teachers to be very wary of applied linguists or linguists bearing tree diagrams. And in fact, so it seems to be, I don't know, I mean, it seems to be, there's a whole industry, nevertheless, that propagates these tree diagrams, as I say, all over the States and beyond. And against, I would say, his own recommendations, or ignoring his skepticism. In fact, not just his skepticism, Bernard Spolsky in 1970 had a round table in Georgetown where they were debating. Now, because this was a new kid on the block in 1970 still, generative transformational grammar, TG, whatever you want to call it, saying, how do we apply this? We've got to apply something because we've just discredited behaviorism and structuralism and there's a kind of void and we've got to fill it. So let's look at what Chomsky's got to say. And Spolsky says, well, you know, because this linguistics is only indirectly applicable to language teaching, changes in linguistic theory or arguments amongst linguists should not disturb language. I love that. I think anybody doing an MA in TESOL, anybody who's learning how to teach should have that printed on a t-shirt or a fridge magnet. Do not be disturbed by the arguments of linguists. And of course, I mean, the other problem is, of course, the theory is constantly changing. It's a moving target. I mean, as new data comes in. God, what's happened to my generative grammar? As new data comes in about languages, of course, you have to, it only takes somebody to discover in the Amazon a language which doesn't have verbs, and they have to go back and re-describe the whole of innate grammar because it's meant to be universal. Oh, there's a language that doesn't have verbs, so it's back to the drawing board at MIT. And I say this constantly, every 10 years there's a major change in the theory. So that's, again, one reason why it's difficult to keep up with and certainly difficult to apply. I'm simplifying grossly, but I mean, it's Thursday evening and we're here for a bit of fun. I'm treading on some toes here. As I say, you're a tree diagram free zone in the New School. Okay, so what? We've still got to account for, can we have a theory of grammar that accounts for the way that it is actually proceduralized psychologically? And of course, yes, we do. We have a theory of grammar that sees grammar as a kind of algorithm. Now, for those of you who know anything about computing, know that an algorithm is a kind of a program or a set of rules which sets something in motion, or a way of doing solving problems or doing calculations. And the metaphor of computers was not accidental. This view of grammar as a kind of set of production plans, if you like, coincided with an exponential growth and theorizing about the mind in the 80s and 90s and seeing it as a kind of computer. The mind as a computer, and the computer as a kind of mind. And so we have a lot of computer terminology, including algorithm, and I chose that deliberately. The notion that the mind or the brain is some kind of processor, processing input and producing output, has been around. It's relatively recent. Even those terms, output and input, think about them, they come from electronics. We get statements like this by Peter Skean, who's written a book called A Cognitive Approach to Language Learning, saying essentially we can think of language use and language acquisition as constrained by the operations of a limited capacity information processing system. That is, the brain. It processes information but it's limited. That's why it can only take so much at a time. Cannot process 13 different rules about the perfect and imperfect in real time. It's actually not a very good computer from that point of view.